The alarms tore through the palace before I even opened my eyes. Red light spilled across the ceiling of my chamber, pulsing like a wound. I sat up, heart slamming, and heard my father's voice crackling through the comm system, sharp and shaking in a way I had never heard before. The enemy fleet had crossed the borderline. I am Velthara, daughter of the ruling house of the Kasari Dominion, and in that moment, I was not thinking about titles or crowns. I was thinking about the flagship Solmara, the pride of our entire defense line, sitting dead in the shipyard with a failing core that no engineer in my kingdom could repair. Without it, we had nothing to answer the ships gathering at our border. Without it, we were finished. I ran through the corridors in my sleeping robes, past guards who did not dare stop me, until I reached the war room. My father stood over a glowing table, his hands pressed flat against it, his face pale under the light. Around him stood our best minds, our finest engineers, all of them silent, all of them useless. "How long?" I asked. "Until the Solmara can fly." No one answered. That silence told me everything. I want to explain something before I go further, because it matters to what happened next. A year earlier, I had been married to a human named Daniel, a quiet aide sent from Earth as part of a peace agreement between our peoples. I did not choose him. I did not want him. He was soft-spoken, forgettable, the kind of man who faded into a room instead of filling it. He spent his days in a small workshop near the outer wall, tinkering with broken maintenance drones that nobody else cared about. I had mocked him once, to my cousin, calling him a decoration with no real use to anyone. I believed it completely. So when one of the junior engineers, a nervous young man named Callum, quietly suggested that my husband might be able to help with the Solmara, I almost laughed in his face. My father did not laugh. My father was desperate enough to try anything. "Bring him," my father said. I walked to the workshop myself, partly out of duty, partly out of a strange need to be there when this foolish idea collapsed. Daniel was standing at his workbench, sleeves rolled up, a small drone disassembled in front of him. He looked up when I entered, and for the first time, something in his expression made me pause. He did not look surprised. He looked like a man who had been waiting. "They need you at the shipyard," I said, keeping my voice cold. "The Solmara's core has failed. Nobody can fix it." He set down his tools without a single wasted movement. "Take me there," he said. The walk to the shipyard felt longer than it should have. I wanted to ask him questions, but pride kept my mouth shut. When we arrived, the sight nearly stopped my breath. The Solmara stretched above us like a fallen giant, its core chamber open, wires and broken components scattered across the floor, engineers standing around it like mourners at a funeral. Daniel walked past all of them without a word and knelt beside the open core. He studied it in silence for what felt like an eternity, running his fingers along broken circuits, tracing lines only he seemed to understand. Then he stood, turned to a nearby technician, and asked for a drafting slate. The technician hesitated, glancing at me as if asking permission. I nodded, though my stomach twisted with doubt. What happened next changed the way I saw him forever. Daniel took the slate and began to draw. His hand moved fast, sure, without hesitation, sketching lines and shapes I did not recognize, symbols that meant nothing to me, but clearly meant everything to him. The engineers around him leaned in, their skepticism melting into something closer to awe. He was not guessing. He was not experimenting. He was recalling, pulling knowledge from somewhere deep and practiced, somewhere that had nothing to do with polishing old drones in a quiet workshop. "This will redirect the power flow around the damaged section," he said, tapping the slate. "It is not a repair. It is a redesign. It will work better than the original system, not worse." Callum stared at the schematic, his mouth open. "This configuration should not be possible with our current materials." "It is possible," Daniel said calmly. "You have simply never tried it this way." I stood at the edge of the group, watching a man I had dismissed for an entire year command a room full of engineers twice his age. My pride wanted to find a flaw, wanted proof that this was luck or foolishness. I found none. Every line he drew connected to the next with a precision that felt earned, not accidental. The engineers began working immediately, following his instructions with a speed I had never seen from them before. Daniel stayed beside them the entire time, correcting small errors, adjusting measurements, never raising his voice, never losing his patience. Hours passed. My father arrived at some point, standing beside me, watching the same scene with the same disbelief written across his face. "Who is this man," my father asked quietly, "that you married?" I had no answer. I realized, standing there, that I had never truly asked myself that question. I had accepted him as a formality, a piece in a political agreement, and never once wondered what lay beneath his quiet manner. Now I wondered if I had married a stranger wearing a familiar face. As the night stretched on, fragments of his past began to surface, not from him, but from a young officer named Elena, who had traveled with him from Earth. She told me, in hushed tones near the shipyard entrance, that Daniel had once served in a specialized division back on Earth, a place where engineers trained not just to build, but to understand systems no one else could read. She said he had been sent here quietly, not as a decoration, not as a symbol of peace, but as someone Earth trusted to watch, to learn, and to help if the moment ever demanded it. He had kept himself hidden on purpose. He had wanted no attention, no suspicion, nothing that might complicate the fragile peace between our peoples. I felt something shift inside me as she spoke, a mixture of embarrassment and something warmer I did not yet have a name for. By dawn, the core chamber began to glow with a steady, even light, a light none of us had seen from the Solmara in days. The engineers stepped back, exhausted but triumphant, as the ship's systems hummed to life around us. Daniel stood at the center of it all, calm as ever, wiping his hands on a cloth as if he had simply finished fixing a drone. The Solmara launched within the hour, faster and stronger than before, its new configuration humming with a power that made even our oldest admirals stare in disbelief. It reached the border just as the enemy fleet began to test our defenses, and the moment its new systems activated, the enemy ships slowed, then stopped, then retreated without firing a single shot. They had come expecting a wounded fleet. They found something they did not understand, and fear of the unknown was enough to send them home. I stood on the palace balcony with my father, watching the enemy ships vanish from our scanners, and for the first time in days, I allowed myself to breathe. Later that evening, I found Daniel back in his workshop, as if nothing had happened, as if he had not just saved an entire kingdom with a few lines drawn on a slate. He was repairing another drone, sleeves rolled up, focused and quiet. "You could have told me," I said, standing in the doorway. He looked up, and for the first time, I saw something gentle in his eyes, something patient that had been there all along, waiting for me to notice. "You never asked," he said simply. I stepped closer, feeling smaller than I had in years, not because he had proven himself powerful, but because I had spent a year standing beside greatness and calling it ordinary. "I am asking now," I said. "Who are you?" He set down his tools, and for the first time since our wedding, he spoke to me not as a quiet aide, but as a man finally allowed to be seen. He told me about Earth, about the years of training, about the quiet promise he had made to protect the fragile peace between our worlds, even if it meant hiding who he truly was. He told me he had chosen silence, not out of weakness, but out of respect for a bond he hoped might one day become real, not just political. I listened to every word, and something inside me that had been closed for a long time began to open. Standing there in that small workshop, surrounded by broken drones and quiet tools, I understood something I would carry with me for the rest of my life. I had believed my husband was ordinary, a man without weight or worth, until the night he drew out the blueprint that saved my father's fleet, and showed me, finally, who he truly was. I had married a stranger. That night, I began falling for the man he had been all along.